Hello anime fan, welcome back to What If Animes 2.0. So in this video you're gonna see, what if Naruto became the Red Rider of the Apocalypse? This is part 1. And if you want more, then hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe. So let's getting the video, and do check out the author of the story. Such a strange item. So small, so fragile, and yet able to call forth power that could tear the entire world apart. These thoughts echoed through the mind of one whose hands were currently wrapped around a small, seemingly metal, object shaped like a diamond. The object was colored blood red, as if it had been dipped in the substance, and had the imprint of a demonic skull with a pair of crossed blades behind the skull. A strange symbol adorned the center of the skull's forehead the current holder could not identify. To any normal individual, it would be considered a low-class trinket, something a person finds in a second-hand antique shop for a nominal fee and end up using as a coaster or simply a bauble whose only purpose is to collect dust. Yet through the gray eyes of its current holder, they saw immense power contained within the seemingly unappealing trinket. With each finger tracing across the rough iron of the item, sparks or some form of energy trickled through the skin, bringing the smallest of movements to the attention of individual. With a causal glance, the item was raised to the sky, the light of the moon illuminating all under its brilliant light in an otherwise dark evening. Fingers continued to trace the ridges of the skull emblazoned upon the diamond-shaped piece of metal, placing the thumb in the middle of the skull's forehead, right upon the unidentified symbol. Not one moment later, the finger began to apply pressure to metal's center, with small cracks beginning to form, excitement building in the mysterious carrier of the item, whose eyes showed growing interest as strange red wisps began to leak from the cracks. A very small twitch of the owner's blank face revealed their intention to cause greater damage, fully intent on breaking the item. "So this is where you've been hiding, I see." The holder showed no reaction, not so much as a single twitch or a goosebump. The holder's eyes were fully trained on the diamond, though the pressure upon the center had stopped. "Valley, your presence isn't necessary right now, leave now." The figure stepped out of the shadows, revealing a silver-haired individual in his late teens. He was clad in red pants with a black shirt and coat. His blue eyes peered down at the individual before him. "You'll have to forgive me, but it's not often you show much interest in anything, thus it's cause to raise some eyebrows. Being born from nothingness, it's hard to imagine anything getting you to so much as crack a smile or twitch," Valley said, leaning against a nearby wall whilst crossing his arms, whilst the figure in the shadows barely turned to acknowledge his presence. "Your curiosity is noted and understandable. Though don't you think you shouldn't be so quick to presume someone will tell you anything simply because you wish to know it?" Valley only chuckled lightly, showing no hint of anger or even care towards the somewhat cold remark. "Perhaps, but you've never really been one to keep secrets, especially from me. Besides, if that piece of metal in your hands plays a part in our mission, I imagine you'd reveal it to us sooner or later. So I figured, why wait?" Ophis didn't respond to the retort, seeing little point in arguing with the silver-haired teen, her gaze remaining on the item in question as Valley moved closer to her. However, he quickly halted when he felt a rather stinging presence in the room, almost as if every step he took to get close stung at him, with miniature needles piercing his being. His eyes quickly scanned the room for the source of his pain and immediately locked on Ophis's form, or rather in front of her form. Managing to make his way close enough to her, he quickly caught sight of a small book before her, open to reveal one of its passages. However, Valley quickly took several steps back as he quickly figured out what the book was. "A Bible? I never pictured you to have any sort of interest in such a childish tome. Especially when there are certain parties present who are less than amused when in its presence." Ophis didn't respond, not so much as moving an inch, yet Valley could sense her using her powers as the book quickly opened, flipping through several pages as if the wind itself were guiding it. It didn't take long for the page shifting to cease and the book to remain open on a specific page. Valley's interest peaked. He slowly advanced toward the tome, making sure to not get too close, lest he suffer the burning pain or headaches any devil would suffer from contact with the book. Taking one fine step, his eyes were able to make out the text on the page. Book of Revelations, Chapter 6, verse 3-4. Valley's expression became slightly puzzled. Despite being a rather knowledgeable individual, reading the Bible never was something he was made privy to due to his devil heritage and generally not caring about what the age-old text stated, much less knowing each passage by heart. His thoughts were quickly interrupted by a cracking sound, causing his eyes to quickly dart in Ophis's direction, whose fingers were now tightening as they applied greater pressure to the item in her hand. Cracks actually were forming from the skull in the center, spreading to each corner of the item, whilst more red wisps appeared to leak out of each crack, the sight of which made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. What in the name of God, ow, is she trying to accomplish? Valley seemed to ask to no person in particular, at least that would have been the cause had it not been for a certain white piece of metal on his arm. It is ancient power, partner. A dangerous force that no being should ever trifle with, regardless of the reason. Albion? Valley quickly brought the white bracelet to his face as he spoke. I take it you know what that thing is Ophis is trying to break? Only small bits of information. Most of what I know is mere conjecture and nothing concrete. However, what I do know is that the power she's releasing from that pendant is powerful and old. As old as the human race itself and potentially older than even me. Valley's ears refused to acknowledge Albion's words beyond that point in his dialogue. Perhaps older than one of the two heavenly dragons. Consider my interest piqued, he mused. His partner, Albion, the white vanished dragon, was one of the oldest and strongest creatures in creation. Very few surpassed him in age and experience, and those that did were either beings who exist on a higher plane like God and the original Satans, or transcendent beings like Ophis. Meaning above all things, whatever was coming wasn't some run-of-the-mill demon and likely had the potential to clause with those same legendary figures. If his curiosity hadn't already kept him from just walking away at this point, his feet might as well have been glued to the ground at this point, 'cause he was staying for the long haul, carefully watching as Ophis's full attention remained on the item as she prepared to speak. And when he had opened the seal, I heard the beast say, "Come and see." And there went out a horse that was red, and power was given to him that sat thereon to take peace from the earth, and that they should kill one another. And there was given unto him a great sword. With each word spoken, Valley felt a haunt presence slowly descend upon him, growing in intensity as Ophis's hand effectively crushed the item in her hand, shattering it completely, its pieces falling to the ground like crimson snowflakes. The red miasma that had been emitted from it seemingly disappeared at first, leaving only the shattered remains of its vessel. The moment, however, was brief as the pieces began to glow a violent crimson red, blood-red electric energy erupting from each fragment, as sounds resembling screams of hatred, agony, death and destruction roared to life in every direction. The sound was so deafening in terms of volume, Valley had to cover his ears. The partner of the white vanished dragon winced as the sounds ripped and tore through his eardrums, whilst sending a cold, dark chill down his spine. It's like being in the middle of a war zone. Gunfire, explosions, sword strikes, bombs, the cries of the dead and the dying? Just what in the 9 levels of hell has Ophis unleashed? A loud thundering roar seemed to answer him, as the sounds of battle and carnage seemed to quiet in response. A presence unlike any he could identify seemed to descend upon the land. Valley stared on, watching as the red energy from the fragments seems to crackle and wail, warping the air around them, before concentrating in the air above them, at least 8 or 9 feet high. The energy quickly took the shape of a blood-red orb, which proceeded to fire another red bolt of energy at the empty space, roughly 20 feet away from Ophis and Valley. The energy bolt started about 10 feet in the air before going straight down in a 90-degree angle, leaving a glowing dark red line in its wake, before halting at the ground. The red line then expanded, seemingly like opening a massive door or gateway, spreading until it was roughly 10 feet high and 20 feet wide. Valley continued to watch, finding himself growing increasingly disturbed by the sight, feeling a strange sensation emanating from the doorway. Cries of agony and pain seemed to resonate from every inch of gateway, and a foul odor spread out of it, now hanging over the area like a dense smog cloud. He actually felt compelled to cover his own nose, the stench affecting his enhanced sense of smell. It's like I'm standing in a sea of blood and corpses. Where exactly does that portal lead to? Nothing. Valley quickly turned to Ophis standing beside him, staring at the portal with her same blank expression, though if he was being honest with himself, he'd swear Ophis's expression changed somewhat, if only by a millimeter or two. Regardless, it still was something to gain the Longinus user's attention and interest. You say nothing. Do you mean it in reference to the dimensional gap? Ophis only registered with a slight headshake as she continued to stare into the seemingly endless red void of the portal. You're half right, Valley, in that the portal is an opening to a void, though not the same void from which I reside. Valley raised an eyebrow at the response, finding himself more confused than before, but not clearly showing it in his body movements, so it's not a part of the dimensional, but is still a void in and of itself. Here I thought there was only one gap in the universe. Well, calling it a void isn't entirely accurate. In fact, if I were being completely honest, I myself am not 100% sure what exactly you'd call it other than a container of sorts. Container? Container for what? As if creation itself decided to abide by the sacred rule of show, don't tell. Valley got his response, not from Ophis's own mouth but from the portal, or rather what he heard from the portal itself. The sound itself, despite sounding far away, still seemed to crash and bellow with the same force as a thunderclap, playing one after the other in a consistent stream of stamps. As the sound got louder, Valley and Ophis could make out a rather large shadow in the otherwise empty red void. It began progressively growing in size as it got closer, whilst its form became clearer and more defined, making out the shape of a rather large creature approaching. Though from what Valley could see, the creature was a mount of some kind as there was a figure perched atop the creature's back, both with piercing red eyes that seemed to glare through the gateway and directly upon his and Ophis's forms. With another resounding roar, the pair reached the entrance of the gate. A single massive leg made its way through the gate, light finally shining upon it, revealing a massive hoofed appendage covered completely in thick, blood-red and ash-colored fur. These were quickly followed by a second hoofed leg, attached to a massive red torso covered by a black iron chest plate that was held up by massive red chains. The chest plate was emblazoned with a skull identical in appearance to the one on the original item. Finally the beast's head emerged from the gate, revealing a massive horse's head, similarly covered in blood-red and ash-colored fur. Red eyes that seemed to glow like burning coals, whilst its head was covered by a thick mane, though not of hair, but of dark red fire, flailing in the wind similar to actual hair. The creature seemed to scan the area, slowly treading through the gate. The crimson mount released heat from its body, exhaling flames from its nostrils with each breath. Finally, the massive beast continued to exit the gateway, fully revealing its massive and frightening form upon the land. However, despite the beast's impressive majesty, neither Valley nor Ophis seemed interested in the creature, focusing instead of the figure who seemed to command the mighty steed. His form resembled a human male in his late teens to early 20s with a build and height similar to Valley's, if not a bit larger. His body was clad in black boots and pants. The pants were seemingly held up by a dark red belt, which held a metal belt buckle with the same skull emblem that had been upon the emblem, which summoned the gate. His upper body seemed to be clad in what appeared to be a very light form of dark gray chainmail armor on his torso and a metal breastplate. The armor itself seemed to extend to the entirety of his arms as bits of the armor was visible, save for his hands, which were clad in black fingerless gloves. Though it was difficult to fully assess the figure's full appearance because of the large, dark red duster jacket he was wearing, a large red hood concealing his face in blackness. Though what seemed to truly catch Valley's eye was the massive sword strapped to the rider's back. It was difficult to fully see due to its position, but from what he could make out, it appeared to be a massive, double-bladed broadsword with a handle similar in color to the rider's coat and horse. From the little of the blade he could actually see sticking out from behind his back, the blade itself was a dark gray metal, seemingly forged and sharpened with unparalleled precision, having an edge that he'd swear could very well cut his eyes if he kept staring at it. Oddly enough, the oppressive aura that had released by the gates, seemingly to grow weaker as the stranger appeared, as if shut off by some other party. Though Valley merely attributed that to the gate, which had since closed once the rider and his horse had left. But yet, something seemed to linger and it was making the young devil, dragon wielder edgy to say the least. So strange, I find myself having the sudden urge to battle this stranger. True enough, I've never really been one to walk away from a fight before or even to stop myself from fighting a worthy opponent. But even though I know nothing about this individual, I find myself wanting to fight him more with every second that passes. His urge seemed to translate towards his powers, as a white and light blue gauntlet seemed to form around his left hand, gradually covering his arm and shoulder before passing over his body. As this occurred, his desire to fight growing stronger with each second that passed. Ophis merely shifted her eyes towards her ally, not showing even a hint of interest or shock in the obvious actions he was about to take, seemingly more interested in the stranger she'd called forth. It'd be wise to rethink your actions, Valley. Though it doesn't truly matter to me if you wish to fight him, it wouldn't accomplish anything. Not that you could defeat him even with all your power. Her comment seemed to fall on deaf ears as the silver-haired devil had since become completely encased in white and blue armor. A pair of massive wings appeared on his back, each holding a set of blue wings seemingly made of pure energy. Only his head remained free as he stared upon his opponent, whilst levitating off the ground. I must say, this is a first for me. Never have I met someone and felt such an uncontrollable urge to fight them. I don't really know what it is or who you are for that matter, so I admit I feel a little odd about this whole thing, but… Valley's head was quickly encased in a white, dragon-like helmet as he rocketed towards the rider and his horse. At this point, all I want is to clash with you. So come on. The rider and his horse merely watched as the teen clad in armor rocketed towards them, seemingly at Mach 2. At the same time, the pair could swear they saw a massive white dragon forming behind the teen, seemingly adding to his ferocity. Yet the stranger didn't even flinch or show single care, barely raising his head to gaze upon the teen in question, who was mere inches away from him. It was in that single second, Valley barreling towards his unknown foe. His eyes caught a glimpse of something buried in the darkness of the stranger's hood. It was a pair of pure, glowing, blood-red eyes. And it was in that single instance of contrast that a familiar aura appeared before him. That same feeling of violence and hate washed over, smashed into his form with the force of a tsunami, as if the very ocean had lifted itself off the ground and crashed down upon him, quite literally. Through some unforeseen force, Valley found himself blasted backwards, faster than he had been flying. His armor, actually cracking as a result of the impact he was seemingly felled by. His form struck the ground unceremoniously, skipping between points of contact with the ground like a rock being tossed across a small pond or river. Ophis watched on as one of her most powerful allies continued to speed across the earth, waiting until he came to a dead stop, which was roughly a mile away. Several pieces of stone he'd passed through now collapsed upon his fallen form, creating a massive dust storm in the process. And upon him was given the power to rob peace from the world of men. You certainly live up to the legend surrounding you. Her neutral expression became slightly sinister, smirking with a degree of wicked glee as she watched the rider depart from his steed, whilst pulling down his hood. Though I suppose I should expect nothing less from one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, isn't that correct, War, or do you still prefer the other name? Her question in response was met by the sound of the rider's hood dropping upon his shoulders, revealing the visage of a young man, his head covered in thick blonde hair, in style resembling a porcupine as a result of all the uneven spikes. Upon his cheeks were a set of whisker-like markings, making him resemble something of an animal instead of a man, made more frightening by the silted blood-red eyes he held, currently glaring upon Ophis with a look of hatred, who responded with a look of demented mirth. My, there's a frightening look. And here I thought you would enjoy the chance to stretch your legs out here on Earth. Well, am I wrong, Naruto? The now identified Naruto's glare grew harsh, his eyes glowing dark red, an aura of crimson shadow like fire appearing behind him, burning the very ground he stood upon. Whilst the evening sounds were replaced by the cries of warfare and bloodshed, the cries of the dead and dying echoing across the sky. Tell me something, Ophis. His voice resembling that of an old war general, containing a raspy whisper resulting from years of shouting and roars on the field of conflict. Before I kill you on this day, please enlighten me to something. As he spoke, his hand quickly grasped the handle of the sword on his back. His aura exploded in all directions, the screams becoming full-blown war cries, whilst his eyes burn with searing heat. Do you have even the faintest idea of just what you have done? Ophis stood in place, smirking as if she held all the cards, not the least bit intimidated by the now identified Red Horseman, War or Naruto, currently glaring at her with unbridled fury, dark red, flame-like energy warping and whisking around his body like a freighting shadow. Yet the dragon god acted rather casually, as if only confronting a friend she'd potentially cheated in a simple game of poker or somehow managed to shanghai into some little plot against their will. Oh wait, that's exactly what it was. Come now, War, Don't you think you're overreacting just a little bit? I mean, have I really done anything wrong? The sound of several loud clicking sounds quickly echoed, as Ophis found herself staring down the barrels and muzzles of countless guns and cannons. Of every variety and make a person could imagine. Each weapon seemingly stacked atop each other as if welded together by a 5-year-old who thought it would look cooler, though the somewhat silly sight was made more menacing by the dark red color of each weapon, along with the fact that there were also missile launchers and bazookas thrown into the mix. Naruto, War stared down at Ophis. Every last gun locked firmly in his grip, his finger on the trigger with each barrel locked onto his target. Without so much as a second of hesitation, he pulled the trigger and unleashed hell. The sounds of gunfire, explosions and pure unhinged destruction screamed throughout the land. Rocks, earth, trees, everything within the immediate vicinity of his weapons was ripped and torn asunder by his miniature arsenal. Naruto, however, merely looked at the scene coldly, his anger surging quietly behind his stone-faced visage, an anger that was slowly building with each second that passed, and every bullet casing that flew itself lasted for several seconds and truthfully could have gone on for an eternity if he'd wanted. But the Red Rider wasn't in the mood to keep wasting his ammo, and after another few seconds of firing he stopped, smoke leaking from each barrel of his guns. He of course continued to look on through the massive dust cloud and sea of destruction he'd just unleashed, clearly not fooled by what had just happened. Well, that was certainly an energetic response. Ophis chuckled lightly, standing within the dust cloud, surrounded on all sides by massive craters, burning trees and scorched earth. Yet not a single scratch or bullet wound on her body in spite of the massive onslaught she just faced. Her eyes quietly traced over the destruction before her, watching as Naruto's guns quietly faded, reforming into the same red energy before returning to his body. Though for the living embodiment of warfare and a master of every weapon ever created, your aim leaves something to be desired. All those shots and not a single one did any damage. Did you really think you'd kill me with those? The Red Horseman, however, merely growled as he cracked his shoulders as a larger amount of the red energy leaked out of him, quickly taking shape behind him. You seem to misunderstand, Dragon. Those shots weren't meant to kill you. As he said this, the energy behind him quickly took form, revealing a massive array of cannons, specifically battleship and tank cannons, heavy artillery weapons and possibly a few railguns here and there. The horseman himself currently situated in between the two largest guns, seemingly talking from a large battleship, which along with the other guns were targeted right at Ophis, ready to fire again. That was meant as a warning shot. The small dragon goddess let out a small whistle at the massive arsenal before her, still not even remotely intimidated despite the horseman now commanding enough firepower to level everything within a 100-mile radius in a matter of seconds. Seemingly more amused than anything else. My, you certainly like to do things in excess, don't you? Naruto's retort to the comment was a loud cannon blast from one of the artillery guns, just narrowly missing the small dragon god by a hair's breadth, his eyes looking down with greater rage, magnified by the loud roar of the explosion he created and the red-hot flames it emitted. I'm not in the mood for pleasantries or conversational bullshit, Ophis. He spoke with irritation, clearly not interested in having any semblance of a reasonable conversation as all of his guns seemed eager to fire. So instead, let's get right down to the meat of things. Namely, what's to stop me from reducing you to absolute nothingness for calling me here? The sounds of his guns each loading or preparing to fire helped to emphasize his eagerness to bring his second onslaught. Ophis, however, casually and without care placed herself on a nearby stone, seating herself while looking up at Naruto's form, placing one of her elbows on her knee and chin in her palm, still looking confident. Well, for starters, if you want to be threatening, I'd say it would be more effective if you weren't only using those little toy guns of yours. After all, you can shoot those off all you want. It'd be no more effective if you tried to assault me a series of water guns. Ophis continued to chuckle as Naruto grit his teeth lightly at the comment, though only doing so in admittance to what she was saying. With a casual wave of the arms, the massive gun assortment quickly reshaped back into the red energy it once was and returned again to Naruto's form as he looked on. As much as I hate agreeing with you, you're absolutely right, Ophis. I know none of my normal weapons can hurt you, and I'm not one who enjoys blowing smoke up a person's ass. Thus, his hand quickly wrapped around the hilt of the sword on his back, his red energy forming a mini tornado around his body, causing his jacket to kick up in the wind, The loud screams of war-torn soldiers and civilians howling in agony and fury, war's own eyes glowing red. Ophis actually raised an eyebrow at the sight before her, though still acted in control. You're actually willing to pull out ruin. Just to threaten me? These peaceful times really haven't done wonders for you, have they? Naruto didn't even respond as he slowly began to pull his sword from his back, the red energy around him increasing in size, speed and intensity with each centimeter it grew free. Let's try to stay on topic, shall we? Now, I'll ask this one more time, and please consider your response very, very carefully. Why, on this or any other plane of existence, should I not take out my sword and obliterate your very existence down to the last molecule and electron? Ophis only frowned at his response, shaking her head. Calmly as she jumped off her seat, always so impatient, you'd figure someone with all your experience would have learned the value of patience. More to the point, do you really think you can threaten me? You and I both know that as strong as you are, you still come up short compared to me. The horseman merely growled in response. I think I'll take my chances, besides it's not like you can kill me, so really you don't have much to threaten me with either. Ophis stared blankly at the rider. Honestly, I'd figure you'd be far more cooperative. This little offer I have would actually give you a shot at several members of the three factions. Certainly you'd love nothing more than to wipe a few of them out, wouldn't you? The blonde horseman didn't seem to resonate well with the response. Hand still firmly latched on his sword. And why on earth do you think that is a good enough reason for me to even consider helping you? If that's your only means of securing my cooperation, then I'd say you're a few cards shy of a flush, Ophis. And here I'd heard that of the four horsemen, it was the Red Horseman of War, who seemed to have an especially deep and bitter grudge against the three factions. So deep in fact he'd have no qualms killing any of their members if given the opportunity. She smirked as she explained her reasoning. You can't honestly expect me to believe there isn't some merit to those rumors. Rumors, no matter how extravagant, always have some basis in fact. Why, we ourselves are living examples of that. So you can't tell me the idea doesn't intrigue you. The horseman, however, continued to unsheath his blade, the angry cries it released growing louder and more violent. The sheer amount of bloodlust it emitted was becoming so palpable Ophis could swear she could taste it on the wind. Regardless of whatever truth there may be to your claims, I still follow the rules of Armageddon and laws of creation. No grudge I hold would make me go against those ironclad rules also. His eyes slowly became somber, his young face more resembling an aged veteran who'd long since be broken by decades of battle and conflict. I'd never let any petty hatred I have blind me to where I'd willingly tear this world apart, not for any reason. His look of fury returned in full as his sword continued to reveal itself. So unless you have some other card to play, I suggest you ready yourself. Ophis could only sigh in response, shaking her head in annoyance. I tried allowing you a willing choice in this endeavor and you spit it back in my face. Though I suppose that's part of the reason I chose to summon you. I doubt pestilence or famine would be nearly as accommodating as you've been. Still, if you're still so quick to start a fight, I guess there's no other option but to play my ace in the hole, so to speak, and make the choice for you. Her hand quickly dove into her shirt, Naruto feeling the urge to tense up at the action, but held himself back. She's not stupid enough to even try to pull some kind of weapon out against me. No matter how powerful she may be, there isn't any weapon, forged or born, that I haven't mastered. His confidence quickly drained, however, once he saw what Ophis pulled from her shirt. The item in question were three very familiar-looking pieces of metal, each in the shape of a diamond, with several intricate symbols on them. However, there were slight differences that helped distinguish them. One of the items was onyx black or just black in color, with a skull upon its face, but with an old-fashioned pair of scales behind it. The second was sickly green in color, the skull seeming somewhat rotted, with chunks of bone missing and a bow and arrow hidden behind it. Finally, the last diamond appeared bone white or sickly pale in color, the skull sporting a single bladed scythe behind it, each diamond giving of an aura not unlike the previous red one, though each seemed far more powerful and frightening. Naruto, however, didn't notice the aura. Instead, his mind and eyes quickly seen nothing but red, as his energy and aura literally exploded around him. His entire body seemingly changed into the same blood-red energy he summoned, the seals. Where did you get those? Ophis regained her confident grin, quietly placing the seals between her thumb and forefinger, clearly indicating her interest to break the seals. resulting in Naruto's aura quickly dying down. It seems the Red Horseman isn't as battle-hungry as I originally perceived, if he's so easily brought to a halt as the mere action of holding a few pieces of metal. Then again, I'd be more than happy to comply with your request and even have a pleasant discussion, if you would be a little more accommodating. To emphasize her point, Ophis applied a slightly heavier amount of pressure on the three seals, not enough to break them or anything of the like, but enough to get the horseman to release his hold on his sword, but his aura still remained strong. Are you really willing to play this little game, Ophis? You and I both know what'll happen if you break those seals. After all, my brothers aren't like me, they don't believe in things like patiences, mercy or proportionate response. And I know they'd soon face extinction than bow down to you. Hell, famine and pestilence would sooner ravage the planet than listen to your. And I know you not so arrogant to think you could control my oldest brother. He doesn't bow to anyone, least of all you. Ophis actually seemed to agree with his words, only meriting a carefree smirk on her face as she placed the seals between her two hands. You'd be right in your assumption. Your two older brothers are a pair of loose cannon catastrophes I couldn't hope to control through any means. And you last brother, well, my reasons for not summoning him are self-explanatory. Her smile quickly shifted to a more manipulative smile, reminiscent of a criminal mastermind, which is why I chose to summon you specifically. You're the only horseman who has any semblance of honor and the only one who isn't so blood-hungry that he wouldn't just set this entire planet on fire for shits and giggles. She then slowly began to slip each of the seals into her shirt, save one of them to act as insurance. Of course, this wouldn't work so well if it wasn't for the rather ironic fact that the Red Horseman, War himself, actually wants to see this world thrive. As opposed to how most would believe you to act, namely being all for watching mankind and the three factions tear themselves apart. The Red Horseman quickly dropped his aura, seeing himself backed into a corner, with few options left, all the while clenching his hands in frustration. Just tell me what you want already, Ophis. You know I won't attack at this point and you've got the edge, so why don't you stop beating around the bush already and tell me what you want? Ophis almost smiled at the declaration, checkmate. She thought victoriously before deciding to comply with his request. Alright, War, remember, as long as you comply with my orders, I promise the seals won't be broken and the human race can continue to exist for the next several millennia without fear. The Red Horseman almost stomped his foot in frustration at practically being tied around the dragon god's finger at this point in time. However, the risk was too great, and she had the edge in this fight. Namely, he had something to lose from this, while she technically didn't have anything, since Ophis' nihilistic personality made it where she all but didn't care about her own life, at least not enough to fear death. So calmly taking a breath, the Red Horseman quietly took a seat on a nearby wall, his red eyes glaring at Ophis as he crossed his arms. Very well, Ophis. I will concede for now since I appear to have my hands tied. Why don't you just tell me what exactly it is you want? The dragon god, seeing she'd won, quietly put the remaining seal back into her shirt and quietly made her way over to War. Glad to see you're finally being reasonable. Quickly taking a seat on a wall adjacent to War, the young-looking dragon faced the frustrated horseman. Now then, let's start off this conversation with a simple question. I trust you're familiar with the dragon known as the Great Red. Considered the oldest and strongest dragon in existence, and current resident of the dimensional gap. Yes, I know a thing or two about him. Ophis oddly didn't seem surprised she'd been cut off. Well, that was a little impolite. You could have at least waited for me to finish my sentence. And I'd be inclined to allow that. But really, are you even remotely surprised? Your grudge against the Great Red is known practically by any higher-level being. Frankly, you whine and boast about it so often, you've become like a broken record. What else could you possibly want? The Dragon of Infinity actually felt the urge to lightly pout at the remark, essentially being called predictable or just plain boring in some sense if one really wanted to stretch it. Regardless. Anyway, since you're so well informed, this should move things along a bit quicker. Her face and visage narrowing to an expressionless, cold glance, all humor vanishing in an instant. I want that oversized, ego-stroking lizard exterminated, so that I can finally regain my original home in the dimensional gap. Ophis seemed to gain a more passionate, regal tone as she spoke. Evidently this was a speech she'd been practicing, and it was no small secret how much she enjoyed just talking about killing and generally defacing the Great Red's name. Sadly, the Red Horseman wasn't the least bit amused. And you want me to what? Kill him for you, is that it? The Red Rider actually started to chuckle at the notion, though it was not the funny, amused laughter of someone who was in a good mood. No, it was the mirthless, empty laughter of a borderline sociopath or a serial killer, amplified by the red energy slowly beginning to form around him. Here's a question: you're one of the most powerful beings in creation, so why don't you get off your tiny, lazy, scale-covered, Lolita ass and do it yourself? I've made it very clear from the start, if you or the three factions want to rip each other apart, fine. But leave me and the rest of the planet out of your petty disagreements. Ophis only sighed at his abrasive response. I never said I wanted you to kill the Great Red. Really, a fight between the two of you would probably cause about as much havoc as the actual apocalypse itself. Actually, it has to do with a certain member of the three factions, and I don't necessarily want them dead. I believe indisposed or restrained would be the better term to describe it. Naruto merely said nothing, a single twitch from his right eye being the only indicator he was even remotely interested in Ophis's continued dialogue. The dragon god obliged, quickly reaching back into her shirt and pulling out a photograph before tossing it with a flick of the wrist into the horseman's hands, revealing the image of a 17-year-old girl with long red hair, blue eyes and a noticeable bust. Naturally, if War was actually as old as he looked, he'd probably be drooling all over the image, nose spurting blood in a comic fashion like a faucet, followed by him making some overly perverted line and then being violently assaulted in a humorous fashion by a member of the opposite sex. Thankfully, War was far too mature for all that bullshit and simply looked at the photo with an analytic gaze. She's a devil, I take it, correct? Her name is Rias Gremory, heir to the House of Gremory and the younger sister of Searsex Gremory, the current Lucifer and leader of the Devil faction. Needless to say, she's a girl with quite the pedigree. Naruto again only looked at the photo with disinterest, not fazed by the girl's appearance, name, family, nor anything else. And I returned to my previous question. Why exactly does one of the most powerful beings in existence need my help to apparently hold off a female devil who hasn't even graduated high school yet? It's actually very simple. After the last Great War, relations between the three factions have been rather strained. Thus, even the slightest offense against any high-ranking faction member or one of their families is bound to draw a large amount of attention. The wheels in Naruto's head quickly began turning, piecing together the plan in mere seconds. I get it. You want me to essentially act as a scapegoat. Stir up waves amongst the ranks by having them focus all their attention on me, so you can settle your own little affair with minimum interference. A clever deception, I'll give you that. The young in appearance dragon god actually grabbed the hem of her dress in a fake curtsy. To receive such a compliment from a military mind as yours is truly an honor. Naturally, I know that you're more than capable of handling this task without issue, and once things are all settled, I will hand the seals over to you. The apocalypse won't be getting an unnecessary head start, and you even get to repay the three factions for their prior transgressions. Doesn't sound too unfair of an arrangement to me. The horseman, however, didn't seem entirely amused. And how exactly do I have your word that you'll hand the seals back over to me once I've done as you've asked? You don't exactly have a reputation for being the most trustworthy creature in creation. That may be, however, I don't have much to gain from stabbing you in the back, and as you've already pointed out, breaking the seals otherwise would be unwise, since the horsemen would treat me with the same level of respect as they do every other creature in existence. Though, in the end, I guess you'll just have to trust my word above all else and hope I keep it. With another smirk, Ophis gave a subtle gesture as if demanding a response. So do we have an accord, horseman? Naruto silently gritted his teeth as he nodded in response. Don't get too confident, Ophis. I'll play you game for now, but should any opportunity reveal itself to me, I will take the seals back by force and then show you the full force of what a horseman is capable of. Scene change. I am one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. A master of unarmed combat, weaponry and battle strategies. And I'm currently spying on teenagers at a Japanese high school. Nothing in that sentence sounded right. These thoughts ran throughout the horseman's mind as his eyes quietly observed the daily workings of the students of Kuo Academy, a high-class Japanese school, of which his target, Rias Gremory, was a student of. After he begrudgingly agreed to Ophis's request, he immediately demanded what information she had on the girl, primarily where to find her, leading him to perform some necessary recon on his target. "Hey, you guys see that thing in the tree? I think it's a bird of some kind, maybe a hawk." "Dude, don't be an idiot, hawks aren't that color and they don't even live in this area. You really need to pay more attention in class." Naruto's gaze quickly diverted to the voice of a pair of students who'd caught sight of him, or rather his current form. Naturally, as part of recon, it's best to move in with stealth as the top priority, and while he could easily have gone in his normal form, that would require things like formulating a background, possible conversation and unwanted interaction with the target or other parties, and in general was just too much of an unnecessary hassle. Thankfully, another one of his powers as a horseman was shape-shifting. Specifically, he could transform himself into any beast or creature ever used in warfare. In this case, a falcon, a red falcon to be specific, an unfortunate side effect of being the Red Horseman, but it was a rather moot issue at this point. With his form taken, he was currently perched on a large tree branch in the middle of the schoolyard, just overlooking the gym, with the main school building in full view. Though, with his precise gaze, he firmly locked onto the abandoned school building, around 200 yards away, Kuo Academy Schoolhouse. Originally abandoned almost 2 decades ago, before it fell into Rias Gremory's control and since acts as her main base of operations, protected under the disguise of the supposed occult research club, he mulled over some of the additional data Ophis had given him regarding the Gremory girl and her activities, himself silently acknowledging a slight degree of intelligence in the plan of using a club to help disguise their unusual activities. Read supernatural. It definitely wasn't the worst strategy in the world, since he'd certainly heard of stranger or dumber ways to conceal such activities. But still, a club that's so exclusive you need to be invited just to get into it and only consists of the school's most popular and elusive students. How have the other students not tried to learn more about the club? They must have to erase students' minds on a daily basis. Snapping from his thoughts for a moment, he focused his scope-like vision at the nearby window of the schoolhouse. A small glimmer of red quickly catching his eyes, before the curtains were pulled apart to reveal his target, looking upon the school with a degree of mirth, and lo and behold, the Gremory princess makes her appearance. The girl's overall appearance was a dead-on match for the photo he'd been previously given, and even he had to admit she was a rather stunning individual. Cascading crimson-red hair, bright blue-green eyes, a figure that belonged more on a supermodel than a 17-year-old. She was the object of every teenage boy's desire and every perverse older man's sick fetishes. However, he wasn't here to gawk, only to gather necessary information on the girl before making his next move. For now he was tempted to get in closer, as despite his enhanced vision and other powers, he unfortunately didn't have X-ray vision and thus couldn't see through walls. No way to get more intel without getting in closer. Just had to be cautious and avoid detection. Though frankly, this would be easier if I could just see through the wall. Really need to ask Death how he does that. The Red Hawk quickly opened up his wings in preparation to fly closer to the clubhouse, when an all too familiar sound resonated through his ears, causing his feathers crinkle and an unsettling chill to run down his spine. Quickly looking towards the noise in question, he let out a loud groan, which came out as more of a squawk, as he felt complete shame at the sight below him. Perverts, it's always has to be perverts. Nice to know no matter where, at what time or even what century I'm in, there's always a nice little group of horny idiots, who opted to always think with their dicks instead of their brains. The parties who'd brought about this ire in the disguised horsemen, were 2 young teenage students of the school. One of the teens had a shaved head and slightly athletic build, while the other had short brown hair and glasses. Physically, neither was what anyone would consider attractive, either physically or mentally, which probably explained why the two were crouched down in front of a nearby wall, peeking through a small hole in the stone and giggling uncontrollably. The giggling in question was a dead giveaway that the pair was up to no good, though a quick scan from the horseman's falcon vision allowed him to peer through the window for an instant, before quickly cutting the connection off once he got the gist of what was inside. Peeping into a girl's locker room, and in broad daylight in a massive open school area. How exactly have these ass clowns not been caught yet? His comment seemed to go unanswered as he continued to stare at the 2 pervs, standing in plain sight, yet none of the students seemed to even notice them. The lack of action on the part of the other students was so baffling to the horseman he actually felt compelled to break his disguise just to go down and kick their brainless asses since it seemed no one else would. However, the falcon slowly grew a smirk on his beak, at least to where it was somewhat physically possible, as he thought of a more appropriate punishment. Might as well teach these clowns a little lesson in respecting women before I spy on the Gremory girl. I doubt Ophis will mind, and if she does, well, fuck her tilde. With a quick flick, Naruto unfurled his wings and promptly leapt off his perch, quickly gliding towards the completely oblivious duo. He, however, quickly felt the urge to grit his teeth or lower his head in shame as he listened in on their conversations. Man, nothing better than peeping on the kendo club. All the nudity we could ever want, and we don't even have to pay for it. The bald-headed teen continued to chuckle, a small amount of drool leaking from his mouth along with a few drops of blood. The glasses-wearing teen nodded. Yeah, Issei really doesn't know what he's missing. In fact, he quickly adjusted his glasses, causing the light to shine on them in a way that made his glasses appear fogged up. I do believe some of the girls went up a size or two. Hey, the girls' cup sizes are actually starting to resemble my last report card, and I'm not complaining. The pair's less than pleasant actions, however, were quickly interrupted by a loud squawking sound, as a large shadow descended upon them. They barely had a chance to look up at the source before they were bombarded by an unholy assault of sharp pecks and slashes from the bird's talons, though thankfully none of the wounds were deep enough to cause serious injury. The falcon in question smiled with satisfaction as he went through his assault, enjoying the girlish screams of the two teens as he continued to attack them. For Christ's sake. Where did this freaking bird come from, and why's he so pissed at us? Who cares, he's getting in the way of our lovely date with the kendo club and their bountiful boobies. Quick, swat him away. Managing to gain some ground, the shaved-head pervert attempted to slap the transformed horseman away. Only for the falcon to quickly ascend higher into the air, resulting in him instead smacking his friend square in the face and flat on his ass. The action in question merited a silent chuckle from the falcon, and now, for the final part of my little scheme. Without a second thought, his eyes zeroed in on the pair once more, before they began to glow a dark crimson red, each eye locked on an individual pervert. The unfortunate victim who'd been slapped was the first to react, looking up at his friend with a rage-filled gaze as his eyes glowed red. You damn prick, what the hell did you hit me for? He quickly jumped to his feet before shoving the teen onto his own ass. He in turn also looked at his former friend with red glowing eyes. Me. You're the one who didn't spot the damn bird when it tried to peck our eyes out and ended up interrupted my moment of a beautiful boob-filled nirvana. I almost reached my peak until you decided to get lazy, and now thanks to you, the kendo club is probably on their way with their sticks to beat our balls black and blue. The teen with the glasses gained an evil smirk at the declaration. Now there's a nice idea. The other teen gained a confused look, before his entire face tightened in extreme pain, his mouth slamming itself shut as he held his breath, trying desperately to choke down a scream. Meanwhile, his friend, who currently had his foot firmly planted between his victim's legs, continued to smirk. Congratulations, my friend, you've just been blue-balled, literally. He watched on as his friend slowly fell to his knees, only letting out weak little murmurs that sounded like a high-pitched cat. Though his smirk quickly died as his entire face seemed to turn blue, twisting in pain as if he'd just started sucking on a lemon, the end result of his downed friend, landing a good solid punch right into his private area. And this is probably the closest you're ever gonna get to seeing any kind of action from anybody. Girl or boy? The pair continued to glare at one another for a brief moment, before they raised themselves to their feet, and with a loud battle cry, the proverbial ball-busting competition began. Punches, kicks, even a headbutt or two, both unleashed a hellish assault upon their most vital areas, seemingly able to ignore the pain despite the repeated attacks. Naruto meanwhile looked upon the scene with a degree of satisfaction. Well, I've managed to make possibly the two most perverted people on this campus beat their balls like punching bags. Hopefully made it so they can never conceive, and if that angry mob of girls with wooden swords approaching them is any indication, they're in for one more hearty punishment. I'd say my work here is done. With a casual nod he proceeded on his way, flying towards the clubhouse, briefly enjoying the sound of rage-filled girls, bamboo practice swords smashing against flesh, and the high-pitched screams of two boys who'd likely need to glue ice packs to their balls for the next year. It was a surprisingly soothing sound. Scene change. Inside the clubhouse. My. Things certainly seem to be rather lively today. Nice to see that Issei's old friends have stayed active in his absence. The sound of a girl licking her lips quickly echoed throughout the room, and I must say, their screams are surprisingly delicious to listen to. I'm tempted to get a practice sword myself and teach them the finer points of pain. The girl in question spoke with a tone that sounded more sensual than angry, making it clear her enjoyment in the other's misery was not of the typical variety. The person in question was a surprisingly beautiful and noticeably well-endowed young woman, with long black hair in a ponytail, tied with an orange ribbon, with a pair of purple eyes that screamed seduction and pain for any who dare enter. A sound of crunching echoing nearby revealed a much smaller girl, with light silver hair and yellow, cat-like eyes, a small, black cat pin holding up her hair. She herself casually observed the sounds of pain resonating across the campus, showing no interest, disgust, or any emotion if you were just going by her facial expression, which was about as neutral as you could get. Perverts deserved to get beaten up. Her voice was eerily monotone, meriting a chuckle from a young boy with blonde hair, blue eyes, and a Bishonen-like face. I'll admit they aren't exactly the most tolerable people on campus, though if I was being honest, they seemed a little off today. They may fight, but from what Issei's told us, they've never been known to be so openly violent towards each other, or so bad at concealing themselves. The strapping young man explained. The black-haired sadist nodded. I don't suppose it could have anything to do with the little spy we have looking at us in the window? All eyes collectively darting towards the red falcon currently gazing at them from a nearby branch, especially when you consider that falcons aren't native to this particular area, and I'm fairly certain they don't come in that particular shade of red. What do you think, bucko? There in the center of the room, sitting behind a rather expensive-looking hardwood desk, chin resting on her intertwined hands, with a calculating look on her face, was the heir to the house of Gremory and Naruto's intended target, the crimson-haired Rias Gremory. Her blue-green eyes quickly locking with those of the falcon, easily able to tell from a single glance it wasn't a normal bird, beyond the observations already made. I think it's safe to assume that whoever or whatever that creature is, the fact that it specifically chose to spy on us means they must be aware of who we are, or at least have some degree of idea regarding our identities. Given his close proximity, I'd say it's best to not beat around the bush and just see what he has to say. She quietly gestured towards the window. Akano, if you'd be so kind as to allow our guest in. It'd be rude to just ignore him at this point. With a chuckle, the young girl made her way to the window. Maybe we should get him a dead mouse to help tempt him in. It would be kind of silly to just open the window and assume he'll fly right into the room. The girl quietly unlatched the window and opened it up, allowing the air to flow into the room as her eyes quickly locked onto the falcon's own eyes. Naruto honestly didn't know how to react. Well, they aren't completely oblivious, which I suppose is good depending on who you're asking. Then again, given these rather peaceful times, that's to be expected. Quietly opening his wings up, he prepared to take flight. Since they know I'm here, might as well oblige them. No point in dragging this out if I don't have to. He quietly flew into the room through the window, before halting midway in the air in the center of the room, keeping himself airborne through repeated flaps of his wings. Gazing upon the Gremory girl, her servants all observing the matter rather calmly yet staying alert. I suppose introductions would be in order, though I'm thinking that would be easier if we spoke face to face, unless you'd prefer to stay as you are? The Gremory girl spoke in a regal tone, almost acting as though she were a king speaking with one of her subjects. Naruto, taking a hint, stopped his flapping as he quickly wrapped both his wings around his body. The wings in question quickly extended outwards and quickly stretched to the ground, slowly replacing red feathers with red fabric, all the while the rest of his body also transformed. The black talons on his feet quickly grew in size, slowly fusing together into a single foot, wrapped in black boots, his legs also changing into more human-like legs clad in black pants. In a matter of seconds, what was once a 3-foot-high falcon, stood a 6-foot-high individual in his late teens, quickly unfurling his now reformed duster jacket, revealing his face and figure to the world, blue eyes looking upon the parties in question with interest. though his focus was primarily directed towards his intended target Rias Gremory, quietly sizing her up with his eyes. Very well, Miss Gremory. Let's talk. Thanks for watching guys.